So good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Independent Socialists in Wellingborough Zoom meeting. ISW's been meeting now for several years, but obviously during COVID, we stopped meeting face to face and went on to Zoom. And one of the positive outcomes of that is that we've been able to invite speakers to our meetings, which we wouldn't normally be able to invite. And we've had people join our meetings from all over the UK and indeed internationally. And indeed, we've got one person today, Zara, who's joined us from the where are you, Zara? From
In Qatar.
in Qatar. So welcome. This is one of the advantages of Zoom, and I very much welcome everybody here this evening. Um, Before I invite Gilbert to start the meeting, I just want to say this meeting's being held in the context of Holocaust Memorial Day, which is tomorrow, 27th of January, which commemorates the Nazi Holocaust and is a recognised national day both in the UK and elsewhere. And I'd therefore like to just spend a few minutes, if we could, in quiet reflection before we start the meeting, in memory of all the victims of the Nazi Holocaust. Thank you, thank you. Um, just a quick announcement that if you're in Wellingborough or near Wellingborough, there is a commemoration event, a memorial event, this coming Sunday at the Swanspool Gardens near the Wellingborough Council offices at 2 o'clock, and it's open to anyone to join. And I very much send out an invitation to you to attend. Okay, so we're now into the main body of the meeting. So welcome Gilbert Achcar to this ISW meeting on the theme of the Arabs and the Holocaust, the Arab-Israeli War of Narratives. And I can't show you a picture of it, but I've got with me a copy of Gilbert's book of the same title. And just to say something about the book, I mean, it's become highly recommended. There's reviews attached to the book, one of which says this exhaustive survey of Arab sources is particularly important in correcting the many distortions circulated by polemicists seeking to paint Arabs and Muslims as anti-Semites. And that's by Eugene Rogan from the Times Literary Supplement. Avi Shalem also describes it as an erudite, perceptive and highly original study. And Simon Sebag Montefiore from BBC History magazine has described it as a fascinating, subtle and original analysis of Israeli and Arab historical narratives. So it's a book that's highly recommended, and I would certainly recommend that you buy it. Gilbert himself grew up in Beirut and is Professor of Development Studies and International Relations at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He's written several books on global politics and the politics of the Middle East, including a book with the same title as this meeting, The Arabs and the Holocaust, the Arab-Israeli War of Narratives. He's also a Marxist and a long-time political anti-capitalist and anti-war activist. So Gilbert, welcome to this meeting. I'm going to kick off with a question which gets to the meat of the topic that you're here tonight, or we're here tonight to discuss. Could you summarize, to kick off the meeting, what these narratives, essentially what these two narratives, the Arabs and Israeli narratives, around the Holocaust and the relationship between Jews and Arabs. What are the essential characteristics of the narratives?
Right. Well, good evening to all, and thank you, Paul, for organizing this event and for your generous introduction. How to summarize the narratives? Well, then that means summarizing them in a very schematic way, but one of them is obvious, which is the Israeli narrative, or let's say the Zionist narrative, actually, which basically portrays the Arabs as having been in some way involved in the Nazi genocide, having been part of the camp of Nazism, if you want, and therefore as being part of the vanquished by the end of the Second World War, which would be a further legitimation of the creation of the Israeli state on Arab-Palestinian land. I mean, what was before the creation of that state, an Arab-Palestinian land. So that's basically what you mentioned by reading one of the comments on the book. This attempt at portraying the Arabs and the Palestinians as basically anti-Semites, as people partaking in the Nazi vision of the Jews in particular, and therefore people who are animated by the desire to kill Jews, if you want. Yeah. So this would lead to statements like, okay, that of Benny Morris, for instance, that was in 2004, if I'm not wrong, when he said, he blatantly recognized that the creation of the Israeli state was done through ethnic cleansing, and he used the formula. But then he said, well, the alternative to that would have been a genocide of the Jews. That means that the Arabs are, in the business of committing that. So that's basically the narrative that you have had. And in this narrative, of course, the central figure for very long and still is the Mufti of Jerusalem, the so-called Grand Mufti, who, as we know, or most people know, because there's so much literature in English and European languages about him, much more actually than in Arabic, is someone who definitely collaborated with the Nazis and the Italian fascists and spent the years between 1941 and 1945, which are basically the years during which the genocide was perpetrated. He spent those years between Berlin and Rome. And so he is the main villain of the story, and generally represented as being the representative, or he's described as being the representative of the Arabs. Sorry, the Arabs, the Palestinians, the Muslims sometimes, whatever angle you find in such propaganda, if you want.
So just to interrupt you, so the Israeli narrative it stereotypes all Arabs as being anti-Semites, or in part the Zionist narrative.
Well, not necessarily all. Not necessarily all. There are still they will find even some righteous, as in Yad Vashem, some righteous Arabs. Even that this may happen, but basically those who opposed the Zionist enterprise in Palestine are all of one kind, which is Nazis, right? Nazi-like people, and the figure of the Mufti is the best representation of what they are, which is the way of distorting realities. So this is the core of the Zionist narrative about this issue, about the relation between the Arabs and the Holocaust, or Arabs and Nazism and anti-Semitism. And of course, you may find a lot of variants of that. I'm just, that's why I said, if I had to summarize it very quickly, this will be schematic anyway, because there are different variants. And on the other hand, I mean, since you asked me what is the Arab narrative, again, here there is not a single narrative, and there are different discourses among the Arabs. I would say definitely as among the Jews, that is, you could speak of a Zionist narrative, and even a Zionist narrative, is something that is more, should be taken more in the plural, because there are more than one Zionist narrative. But definitely, if you are saying Jews, then you are getting, trying to put all Jews in the same or behind the same narrative would be in itself some form of racist perception. And the same goes for people who put all Arabs in the same category. And that's one of the things that I stressed in the book, that the Arabs in the singular, in the singular of a monolith, do not exist, and you have a variety of political currents and discourses in the among the Arabs, and you have had this variety in relation to the phenomena that we are discussing, the historical events that we are discussing, Nazism, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and the rest. Mm-hmm. So that's what the book gets into. That is deconstructing these very stereotypical kind of representations, and showing this whole variety and the complexity of the issue, and especially dismissing the view that the Arabs were basically pro-Nazi and anti-Semites, which is a total distortion of the historical reality.
You mentioned the Palestinian Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini, in particular, is often referred to. And indeed, there were others like him who quite clearly supported the Nazis and the Axis powers during the war. And indeed, al-Husseini went to Germany and went to Italy and met with Mussolini and what have you. How representative was he of anti-Semitism within the Arab world and within the Palestinians? And what was the other groups within the Arab world who were anti-Nazi, who opposed him, so that we can begin to get this nuanced picture of the Arab world, in the same way as within Europe, of course, and the United States, there were pro-Nazi forces and also anti-Nazi forces. So in the Arab world, how representative was he, and how and what were the groups that counterposed within the Arab world and were anti-Nazi?
Well, the issue here again is complex, and not at all the kind of caricature that you may find in the Zionist propaganda. Because the Mufti, first of all, let us remember that he was appointed as Mufti at the ridiculous age of 26, or 21 actually, in 1926, by Herbert Samuel, who was not exactly an anti-Zionist, and the High Commissioner for Palestine, the British High Commissioner. And This is a man who collaborated with the British colonial authorities for many years. I mean, with those who appointed him and funded him for many years. But then he turned against the British authorities when also the Palestinian public became more and more hostile to the colonial authorities, especially that they were fostering the Zionist project and helping the Zionist project develop. So by the late 20s, you started having clashes in Palestine, and that developed later on, and therefore, I mean, he transformed himself into some kind of national anti-British leader after having been, of course, throughout his period, opposed to the Zionist project itself. The fact that he fled to Germany after having been obliged to leave Palestine, fleeing the British authorities in 1937, and then he went to Lebanon, Iraq. I mean, I'm not going into details, but he ended up in Europe, as I said, in 1941, between Berlin and Rome. So, I mean, this has to be put in in a more general framework. I mean, you have had more than such one figure in the colonial world who sought support from the Nazis because of the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and therefore those who were fighting against French or British colonial oppression tried to establish contacts with the Nazis at some point before the war, and then for some during the war. The Indian nationalist leader Bose is a famous case in point. People, I mean, would understand in the Arab world that the Mufti was trying to do the same, although this was not popular. This was not, very few supported his action, and especially that he turned into, propaganda contributor. He turned into a contributor to the Nazi propaganda. Very much so, and went quite far in his collaboration with the Nazis, and that was not popular at all. I mean, even among those politicized, there was wariness of the fact that he was betting on the wrong horse in some way, and if you take the results. During his time in Berlin and Rome, all his exhortation of Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims and the rest to fight with the Nazis had very little impact in the Arab world. If you take the figures, you will find that there's, the numbers of Arabs and Palestinians who joined the Nazi war machine or the Axis war machine is extremely limited, and nothing compared to the vast numbers that were that contributed to the liberation of Europe from the Nazis. Here I'm speaking of the troops organized by the French, the Free France in North Africa. And if you take Palestine, you had definitely much more Palestinians involved in British troops fighting Nazis than you had in Nazi troops or in Germany. So that was a total failure. And just, how many uprisings you may point to trying to help the German war machine in the Arab world? There is none. There was a coup in Iraq, but that was not a coup motivated by helping the Nazis. It was a nationalist coup, an independence coup against the British domination. And then at the end, they sought support from Nazi Germany, but they also sought support from the Soviet Union. So just to tell you. So that's it. I mean, that's why the portrayal of Husseini as representing the Palestinians and the Arabs and the rest does not work. And that by the end of the war, it was clear that he had no real support. He ended up in Cairo, and then he had to leave Cairo when the nationalists took power, seized power under Nasser in Egypt, because he clashed with them. Then he was in Beirut, and when the PLO was founded, he was actually hostile to it. So that's a person who lost credibility. Because of his betting on the Nazis, which was a major catastrophe politically for the Palestinian cause. It was very harmful, and that's also why today, if you look at Palestinian camps or whatever, you won't find any street or anything named after him, and even Hamas, which is the closest, if you could say, if one would say, ideologically as an Islamic fundamentalist organization to what the Mufti was. Even Hamas did not name their rockets after him, but after Qassam, for instance, Izzeddin Qassam. So that's really shows you the limitation of that.
Thank you very much for that. Just to mention, in your book, I mean, something that I found very interesting, it's a very small fact in your book, but you refer to the fact that, of course, the Nazis captured many Arabs and Palestinians who were fighting within the British Army, and they offered them the opportunity to fight on the Nazi side, but very, very few took up that offer, if you like, even though they would have been granted that they were obviously prisoners, but they would have been. Is that something of significance, or is that just a minutiae of the facts? But I found that very interesting, that very few Arabs
yes.
who.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, all the efforts of the Mufti to create some kind of Arab wing or Arab branch or Arab battalion or whatever for the Nazis failed. The only thing he managed to do was this Bosnian SS unit among Bosnian Muslims. I mean, he did not form it, but he contributed to that. And even that, if you look at the history of this, they were not involved in the genocide of Jews. They were involved in their own ethnic battles there, and when moved to Europe, they rebelled. So that's I mean, actually, so I mean, any attempt at connecting the Arabs or the Palestinians to the genocide, I mean, is doomed to fail, because there is absolutely nothing in the historical record that sustain such a ridiculous view. And that's the key point. And therefore, the idea of what's behind the Zionist narrative? The idea is the Palestinians bear a part of responsibility in the genocide. And that's why in Yad Vashem, the largest picture, aside from Hitler, the largest panel, I haven't been there, but that's the description that I've seen, is the Mufti. And in the encyclopedia of the Holocaust by Yad Vashem, the second longest article after Adolf Hitler is Mufti Amin al-Husseini, which is ridiculous. I mean, he is a very little clog in the Nazi machine compared to people like, I don't know, Himmler, Goebbels. You have hundreds of Nazis much more important than this guy. Mm-hmm. But the whole purpose of representing or blowing him up is to say the Palestinians bear part of the responsibility in the genocide, and therefore they had to pay for it. And it's very just that the state of Israel be built on through ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. Basically, that's what you have behind this.
Yeah. Could I ask, before I open it up for the conversation to a wider grouping of people, could I just ask you one further question? Would it be true to say that prior to the 19th century, or latter part of the 19th century, the relationship between Arabs, Muslim, Christian, Jewish communities within Palestine, within the wider Arab world, was relatively, in fact, relatively harmonious, was relatively peaceful. People kind of lived together. I mean, and there were, of course, Jewish communities across the Arab world, from Morocco to Tunisia, across right through to Iraq and Iran. And somehow the 20th century and the way a whole series of ideologies came together, Zionism, anti-Semitism, fascism, nationalism, all kind of Islamic fundamentalism, all kind of came together in this complex mix. Does that help to kind of begin to place the narratives into a 20th century paradigm, where prior to that these narratives didn't exist?
Well, I mean, historically, I mean, we're not going to. I mean, it's not useful to claim that it was, you know, a paradise of coexistence in the Middle East. I'm not saying that you said, but some people try to that, because it would be ahistorical. In the sense that as long as you had, I mean, in pre-modern times, governments that were religious at the same time, religious minorities were not in the best position. However, where it makes sense is if you compare, and if you compare the condition of the Jews in the Arab world, what we call today the Arab world, and their condition in Europe, well, there's absolutely no possible discussion here. And the very fact that when the Jews were expelled from Spain by the Catholic Reconquista of Spain, well, they found refuge in Muslim lands, in those countries that you mentioned. I mean, Morocco, from Morocco to Turkey, actually, Muslim and Arab countries, Muslim countries in general, were those who welcomed the Jews as refugees, because Islam was much more tolerant of Judaism than Christianity was, especially Catholicism. So that's the historical fact, which is undisputable, and therefore you would even be surprised. I mean, people are surprised to learn that even the Islamic fundamentalist, before the unfolding of the Zionist project, before even its beginning, which, as you know, the Zionist, the statist Zionist movement, what we call Zionism today, was founded in 1897. So before that, you may find that, for instance, at the time of the Dreyfus affair, the famous Dreyfus affair, the famous anti-Semitic events in France, a major theoretician of Islamic fundamentalism was I mean, condemning those Europeans for their persecution of our cousins, the Jews, you know, and there were even attempts, even after the foundation of the Zionist movement, this theologian I'm speaking of tried to connect with the Zionist movement and, you know, to have some discussion about, look, you are welcome as refugees, and you are welcome to come to our lands, and let us fight together against the British, if you want, or prevent that. No, it is the unfolding of the Zionist colonization in Palestine, and the fact that it took the form of the form that we know of expulsion of Palestinian peasants from the lands acquired by the Zionist movement and the rest, and the fact that it crystallized as the project of appropriating Palestine, appropriating the land, and building a state on the land. That led to this big clash. So as even someone who cannot be suspected in the least of any anti-Zionist inclination, Bernard Lewis says the anti-Semitism in the Arab world is not the cause of the conflict, but the product of the conflict. Well, that's an absolutely a true statement. That is, whatever anti-Semitism there is, because there are some forms of or some anti-Semitic currents in the Arab world, for sure, but this is derived from the Arab-Israeli conflict. This is a reaction to Zionism, not something that is or used to be originally a major trend in the region. And actually, modern anti-Semitism entered the region, first brought by some Christians, by the way, and in translations of European texts. And even the central figure that did this was, again, this Islamic fundamentalist theologian in the late 20s. Well, he basically reproduced things that you could find in the European anti-Semitic literature. Not things, I mean, he mixed them with some Islamic references, but basically he was, repeating the famous tropes of the anti-Semitic propaganda, the role of the Jews in finance, the role of the Jews in wars, the fact that they covered the whole spectrum from Rosa Luxemburg to Rothschild, and that kind of perspective. That's what you find, which has nothing to do with the history of the region, by the way. It's just purely European. So it was a reproduction of European anti-Semitism. And again, this was taken by one wing, one of the discourses that you have in the region. But you have so many other discourses which were actually more, some of them more important. You had I defined 4 categories, and I explained how each category of opinion related to the question. So you have the liberal Westernizers, you have the Marxist, and because you had a strong Marxist movement in the region, by the way, including in Palestine, you had the nationalists, the Arab nationalists, and part of them were left-wing nationalists. And you had the Islamic fundamentalists. And for obvious reasons, those who could most easily connect with some anti-Jewish view, not anti-Semitic, but even anti-Jewish, were the fundamentalists, who had the inclination to look at things through the religious prism. But they were but one current in the region, and much less important historically than what they became in the last few decades due to very different historical reasons.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else wish to join this conversation, asking a question or making an observation at this point? I put out a note. I don't know if people have received it. If you want to put up your hand, please do, and I can bring you into the discussion. I see Roland. Yes, please unmute yourself, Roland. And
and also someone's raising a physical hand. Michael is raising a physical hand.
Yeah, I can't see physical hands, unfortunately, because I'm on speaker view.
I'm trying to find where to put that hand up on the thing.
If you go to reactions,
reactions,
and then raise hand.
Sure, there you go.
Okay, a couple of brief points. I might want to say some more later, but a couple of brief points. First, to pick up on Gilbert's thing about Jewish exiles from Spain finding sanctuary in Europe, finding sanctuary in Muslim countries. I think it's also worth noting that at the end of the Second World War, the one country that had been occupied by the Nazis that had a higher Jewish population than it had before the beginning of the Nazi occupation was Albania, which was almost totally Muslim state, where there was an absolute refusal to collaborate with the Nazis and absolute solidarity with Jewish refugees and the Jewish population. I mean, I think this completely gives the lie to any suggestion that there's historic Muslim Islamic hostility to Jews, or that has anything to do with the conflict. The other thing I wanted to say something about, there's been a lot written, a lot of it ignorantly written as well, about Zionist collaboration with the Nazis. Now, I don't really want to go into that at the moment. It's a can of worms that I don't really want to open. But the one thing I do want to talk about is that in the Zionist community in Palestine itself, there was an attempt to set up an armed underground organization in collaboration with the Nazis. It's the group that it called itself in Hebrew, the Fighters for the Freedom of Israel. In English, it's usually known as the Stern Group. After British, they published a manifesto basically expressing ideological sympathy with Nazism, and also they took up the attitude that the main enemy is the one who occupies my country, and my country is being occupied by the British, therefore they are the main enemy. After the leader, Stern, was murdered by the British, the group was led by a triumvirate. One of this triumvirate, Yitzhak Yezernitsky, later became Yisrael Shamir and Prime Minister of Israel. So Hadramin al-Husseini was marginalized and ignored by Palestinians largely after the Second World War. But Shamir, who actually attempted to set up an armed underground and hoped to become puppet leader of Palestine under Nazi rule, actually became Prime Minister of Israel subsequently. I mean, I think that shows partly some of the difference between what was going on, and also I think is an effective rebuttal to the argument that because one prominent or semi-prominent Palestinian leader collaborated with the Nazis, therefore all Palestinians were guilty. That's not true, and nor is it true that all Jews or all Zionists were collaborators.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Well, the Arabs in general, and Palestinians included, had good reason to have zero confidence in the Nazis, if only because the Nazis were the close allies of the Italian fascists, and they saw what the Italians did in Libya. You know, so all the Arab world was knew about the massacres of the Italian fascism in Libya, and the famous figure of Omar al-Mukhtar, who's a major national hero in this fight, and therefore they understood that betting on it, the axis, the German-Italian axis in fighting French and British colonialism was completely vain. And that's why, I mean, that was a key reason actually why this wasn't popular. And people had this direct experience, I would say, even more than people would have in India or other places. So yeah, that's part of the story. And I mean, for the rest, yes, you're absolutely right that actually the only political organization that really was a clone of the Nazi Party in the Arab world was an organization in Lebanon, originally founded in Lebanon and Syria by a Lebanese Christian who tried to imitate the Nazism in various respects. So that's the only clone that you have in the Arab world, and the closest to Nazism and fascism. But then if you look at the region, the second closest is within the Zionist movement. That's where also you had, I mean, Jabotinsky himself was a proclaimed admirer of Mussolini. Here, the model was more Mussolini and Italian fascism than Nazism before the obvious reasons. And yet, I mean, it's not a can of worm it shouldn't be what Roland mentioned. I can recommend a book that is above suspicion on this, which is Frank Nicosia's book on Nazism and Zionism. I mean, or Zionism and anti-Semitism I can't remember. There's Zionism and Nazi Germany or something like this. It's Cambridge University Press, so it's you know, kind of
it's around somewhere.
Perfectly respectable academic book. And it's amazing what the book reveals and what tells you, including the pictures, the photos of training camps in Germany for for sending the German Jews to Palestine. We should remember that until 1941, and regarding German Jews, the Nazis were not in the business of genocide. They were in the business of deportation, ethnic cleansing. Judenfrei, that is free of Jews, meant for them deportation at that point. And therefore you had this kind of in some way natural, albeit unholy collaboration between the Zionist movement and the Nazis, both having a stake in transferring the Jews, the German Jews in that regard, to Palestine. And I mean, Hitler did not want the Jews to go to Britain or to the United States because he feared that they would lobby against Nazi Germany and support the boycott and all that was launched at the time. And by the way, the Zionist movement played a key role in aborting the boycott of Nazi Germany that other Jewish movements were promoting. So all this we have to keep in mind. This is not a can of worms, or at least this is a can of worms that should and must be opened, because it shows also the whole duplicity of the Zionist movement, and also, I mean, the fact that you know, they have consistently put their own project above the interest of the Jewish communities. Whatever they say is a pure lie. It's what they are only interested in, what serves the building of their state and their project. And actually, in some way, as Theodor Herzl said it in his book, in his manifesto, our propelling force is the misery of the Jews. I mean, so you know, the more they face trouble in other countries, the more they will be coming to Israel, and the better it is for us. That's basically the logic. Mike
Sumner, could I bring you in at this point?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Hello, Gilbert. Thank you very much for your talk. The idea of, you know, the Grand Mufti aiding and abetting effectively the Nazis is an argument that I see thrown out very often by the Israeli narrative. And it's very frustrating to not hear the counter arguments. And I'm glad you just brought one of them up, which is the transfer agreements, the Hebrew word being the Havara agreement, which is the thing that, as we all know, that Ken Livingstone got himself very much in trouble for a few years ago, although it's perfectly true. But there's so much hypocrisy going on here. You know, whenever I hear this, usually I hear it thrown out by a very slick Israeli representative in a live interview, sometimes on Newsnight with a Palestinian representative. But, you know, they need to kick back against this. I mean, it's so obvious when you look at it in the round, you know, the idea that it's almost used as if it's kind of like, well, the Grand Mufti did this, so therefore the Palestinians should forever lose their liberty. That's the kind of narrative that's going on. Well, you know, all that needs to be said is that, well, if you look at it things that way, then, you know, France officially collaborated with the Nazis. They had the Vichy France, Italy, all of the Axis countries, Hungary, Finland, you know, so many. Like, what are you going to punish the populations of those countries forever? You know, these arguments need to come across. So, you know, I mean, I'm just making points here, which I'm sure you know, but it is frustrating. It's frustrating to not hear these counter arguments. And, you know, I'd like to know, you know, how Palestinians, you know, when they are put in front of Western cameras, could actually say some of these things to bring them out.
I'm gonna bring in Tony at this point, if I may, to try and get a couple more people in, and then come back to you, Gilbert. Tony?
Okay. Yes, hello, Gilbert. Can I ask whether the emphasis is the way in which the role of the Mufti is emphasized and elaborated on in Western, from the Western point of view, since the setting up of Israel, serves to, and in a sense, blaming Palestinians. Do you think that serves the purpose of diverting attention away from the ways in which Western capitalism, America, this country, and so on, was compromised in supporting Nazism? That's the first question. You know, you've got American interests like Ford and so on, and certainly media interests in this country which supported the Nazis. So if you could blame Palestinians and one single Palestinian leader, then you divert attention from some of those realities. And the second thing is there a contemporary situation in which this whole story of the Mufti justifies the expansion of Israel, the settlements and so on? And is it deployed currently in terms of we're justified in setting up these settlements because the Palestinians were anti-Semitic?
Gilbert, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah,
and the previous contribution from Mike?
Yeah, and well, first on thank you to Michael and Tony. Michael, yeah, definitely. I mean, if anyone should have paid, if you want, for the genocide, it is Germany, and in that sense, the U.S. occupation authorities, you know, offered David Ben-Gurion to build a Jewish state in Bavaria. Well, that would have been definitely, from the historical point of view, I mean, in any part of Germany, more justified than building it in Palestine. I mean, this is so the issue is that actually, and that connects also to the point made by Tony, but there is a major responsibility for Western countries in the genocide, in the fact of not having opened their doors. I mean, here I'm speaking of the United States and Britain, not having opened their doors to the Jewish refugees. And you know about the Evian conference before the war that Roosevelt organized to try to see how the Jewish refugees could be dispatched. And one after the other, the participants, many states, you know, just declined. And the only country, I think, was Costa Rica or some country like that in Latin America, willing to take on board Jewish refugees. So this is a terrible a chapter, if you want, of this whole story, and little is said about it. Although now I've been told, I haven't seen it yet, I haven't watched it yet, but there's some kind of series on I don't know which streaming thing on America and the Holocaust. I don't know if anyone among you has seen it, but I don't know if it's Netflix or something like this. There's a documentary series on this issue, but I mean it's well known, and so there you have a major responsibility. And after the war, it's the same. They were only happy to get rid of the survivors by sending them to Palestine instead of opening the doors of the United States or Britain or whatever to them. And there is no doubt that the overwhelming majority of European Jews who wanted to, who were fleeing Nazism and later on wanted to flee the region would have preferred North America, the United States. Palestine was only the choice of a very tiny minority, and those who went there not by choice, many of them left the country after they discovered what is going on. So yes, that's part of this whole story. So a lot I mean, when you start unraveling this whole thing, you will find a huge lot of responsibilities that are hidden behind the accusations hurled at the Palestinians and the Arabs, and that's a very hypocritical way of dealing with that. Now, the Mufti could not, I mean, is zero justification for the fact of taking over a land and kicking out 80% of its population. And even if you want to avoid the discussion about whether they were expelled or not expelled or even invited to leave by their leaders, as the Zionist narrative would want. Well, what is undisputable is that they were never allowed to go back, and that's the key point. So that's how this usurpation of Palestine happened. So that's a very clear colonial takeover. And the fact that people who had escaped the Holocaust, the fact that people who had been victimized in Europe, and there's no doubt about that, of course, they have been persecuted and the rest. The fact that they were implementing this does not change its nature. It remains a colonial enterprise, and therefore with all the consequences of that. And the people who, I mean, including the huge lot of Jewish thinkers throughout the history of Zionism who were critical of Zionism, all were warning of the fact that this Zionist enterprise will end up into fostering racism and the rest. I mean, you can't get into a colonial project and have it free of racism. And there we are. I mean, look at Israel today. This is one of the most far-right governments on earth today. And that's the result. That's the result of the, I mean, that is a result that was, I mean, I would say congenital to Zionism, because the very fact of having an racist conception, an ethnic ethnocentric conception of building a state and in a colonial manner, that is something that cannot be separated from racism. That leads sooner or later to the worst forms of racism taking over. And that's what we are seeing today.
I think at this point, we'll take a break. I know there are two people wanting to come in, Chet and Stan, but perhaps we could, if you could hold on to those things, and we'll come back to them immediately after the break. But it's now gone 8 o'clock. Gilbert's been responding to things and for an hour now. I think it's be useful to take a 5-minute break and then come back if that's okay.
As you wish, no problem with me.
So you can leave your cameras on and everything, but if you want to go away and make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, come back in 5 minutes. So 7 minutes past 8, we'll restart. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And I'm going to pause the recording now. Tony, you're going to have to remind me to keep it on, to switch it back on.